also how COVID-19 has impacted the UK. This includes impacts of COVID-19 in care homes, on people from different ethnic groups, as well as people in different occupations. The data have come from primary care, from Public Health England, and from hospitals. We've also looked at mathematical models that have helped us to understand how different vaccine strategies might be used. The UK is fortunate in that we have one of the best immunization programs in the world. Every year, through the infant, childhood, and adult vaccination programs, millions of us are protected from serious disease. All of that expertise also informs JCVI's decision-making. For the first phase of the pandemic and its vaccination program, we are suggesting that vaccines are offered in order to protect people who are most at risk of dying from COVID-19, as well as to protect health and social care services, because by doing so, we also protect lives. The advice is divided into two main parts. The first is to offer vaccination according to the estimated risk of dying from COVID-19. The risk of dying from COVID-19 is very strongly associated with age. Age is by far the single most important factor in terms of risk from COVID-19. The second strand to the advice is regarding implementation of the vaccination program. And we advise that due attention is paid locally to mitigating health inequalities. I'll say more of that in a moment. On the next slide, you will see the prioritization order in terms of the offer of vaccination. Residents in care homes for older adults and care home workers are the highest priority. Following that are those 80 years of age and above, alongside frontline healthcare and social care workers. Then come those 75 years of age and above, followed by those 70 years of age and above, alongside people who are clinically extremely vulnerable because of specific health conditions. They're followed by people who are aged 65 years and above, and then individuals who are aged 16 to 64 years with underlying health conditions that also put them at risk of COVID-19, but where those conditions are not already represented in the conditions putting somebody at clinically extremely vulnerable risk. The prioritization order then continues down the age groups until all those aged 50 years and above are included. This is phase one of the program. In phase one, we hope that 90 to 99% of people who are at risk of dying from COVID-19 will be included or covered. The next part of the advice relates to implementation of the program. We advise that local NHS providers, local public health teams, and local leaders work together to address community needs and local needs. We suggest that community teams work together to mitigate against health inequalities that might occur in relation to ethnicity, deprivation, or access to health care. We also recognize that there may be operational reasons why the prioritization needs to be more flexible, and this may relate to vaccine characteristics or vaccine supply or exceptional personal circumstances. Overall, we have good news today. We have a vaccine that is acceptably safe and effective. Good vaccine uptake will save lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lim. Let's now turn to questions from the media. And our first question comes from Fergus Walsh of the BBC.
Oh, right, thanks very much. Question for Dr. June Rain. How can you reassure the public that they can have absolute confidence in this vaccine, given how quickly you've approved it? And for Professor Wei-Shen Lim, can you just sum up for me the reasoning behind your list of priorities about who gets the vaccine first?
Thank you. A really important point relates to the thorough work, scientifically rigorous, methodologically sound that the agency has done. And the way of working in a rolling review ensures that our teams of clinicians and scientists are working in parallel to complete all the work according to strict guidelines on safety, effectiveness, and quality is complete. This vaccine has only been approved because those strict tests have been done and complied with. And everyone can be absolutely confident that no corners whatsoever have been cut. Perhaps if I could think of an analogy, if you're climbing a mountain, you prepare and prepare. We started that in June. By the time the interim results became available on the 10th of November, we were at base camp. And then, when we got the final analysis, we were ready for that last sprint that takes us to today. And that is the exemplary nature of the work that's been done. And the public deserve nothing less. I'll hand to Professor Lim now.
Thank you. So in relation to the offer of vaccination, prioritization was based on the risk of dying from COVID-19, and in order to protect the most vulnerable, we have prioritized the most vulnerable individuals first. The other element is protection of the NHS, the health and social care system, because by protecting the NHS, we also protect lives.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now turn to Victoria MacDonald from Channel 4. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Can you explain for me why the MHRA has been able to authorise this vaccine so much faster than the European Medicines Agency and the Food and Drug Administration? Is there any difference in the levels of evidence that was submitted or the checks required? And secondly, how long is the lag, or is there a lag, between being given the vaccine and for it to become effective?
Thank you. I'll take the first question and then turn to Sir Munir. The way in which the MHRA has worked is equivalent to all international standards. We are well aware of our national situation, and therefore we have mounted teams, built our capability, and worked in parallel. And I want to thank the colleagues who've worked day and night, weekends, to enable us to come to this position. The public can be absolutely confident that the standards we have worked to are equivalent to those around the world. Sir Munir.
The vaccine requires 2 doses, 21 days apart. And from the data that's been presented to us, people will be immune 7 days after the second dose. A partial immunity does occur after the first dose, and we can see some protection occurring after day 12 after the first dose, but the best immunity is 7 days after the second dose.
There will, of course, be longer-term follow-up to provide further reassurance from the data, the robust data we already have. Our next question comes from Emily Morgan of ITV. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. My first question is to you, Dr. Rain. This is a pretty historic moment. You've approved this vaccine in record time. I just wondered how much of a momentous moment this is for you and indeed for science. And then a question to Professor Lim. This is on the priority list. Can you confirm that care home residents will indeed still be the first to receive this vaccine, given how unstable it is and tricky to move to care homes and care home residents, or indeed will NHS staff actually, in fact, be the first to receive it?
Thank you. I'll take the first question, if I may. The reason we're here today is the brilliance of science and also the altruism of all those people who have enlisted in clinical trials to give us the tremendously robust data we have today. And thirdly, it's due to the agility, commitment, and extremely high scientific standards of all the staff at the MHRA who've worked on this, and the privilege of having an expert advisory outreach, our Commission on Human Medicines and its expert group chaired by Sir Munir. So it is the culmination of all these things that the UK is able to bring together and to look always to the public for whom this is for. Professor Lim.
Thank you. The JCVI's advice is aimed at maximizing benefit from vaccines, and therefore it's aimed at the most vulnerable people, which are people in care homes. Whether or not the vaccine itself can be delivered to care homes is obviously an important point, and there will be some flexibility in terms of operational constraints. The JCVI's advice is that every effort should be made to supply vaccine and offer vaccinations to care home residents. Whether or not that is actually doable is dependent on deployment and implementation.
Thank you. I wonder if, Sir Munir, you would like to add, because clearly while the responsibility of the MHRA relates to the standards of science, we also look at it in the context of the real world, which is what Professor Lim has described. Sir Munir.
Yeah, so we did obviously look at the stability of the vaccine. As you said, it is stored at minus 70 degrees, but we were able to look at stability data, and the stability data is showing that it is stable for a short period of time at 2 to 8 degrees, which allows it to be transported to the relevant vaccination sites.
Thank you. Let's now turn to the next question, which comes from Gordon Rayner of the Daily Telegraph.
Thank you. Can I ask, have you identified do you know when the first vaccine will be delivered, which day we can expect that? Have you identified the first person who's going to get it? And if not, how are you going to decide who that person will be? Will the highest risk tiers be given priority, so that the tier 3 areas with the highest incidence? And also, can I ask whether you know whether economic decisions have been factored in, i.e. when you get down the list of priorities, will people who can't work from home get the vaccine before people who can work from home?
These are helpful points that everyone wants to know, and I know my colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care are working again tirelessly to make sure that the first vaccine will be delivered as soon as all the checks are completed. I can speak for the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, who are ready to complete their checks on the first batch. So everything is being looked at 24/7 to enable this important public health step to be put in place as soon as possible, not a minute wasted. Dr. Lim, would you like to talk a bit more about your perspective on this?
As far as I understand, the NHS is working hard to deliver the vaccines as soon as possible. But that is not within the remit of JCVI to impose any time limits on vaccine delivery.
Bear in mind too that many thousands have already had the vaccine as part of clinical trials. So there is a continuum here, and our knowledge of benefits increases over time. So perhaps it will seem to be a historic moment when the first person, after the approval of supply, has their vaccine. But, Sir Munir, we see this very much as an ongoing process.
Absolutely. So it is very much an ongoing process with regard to this vaccine and future vaccines coming through in order to be able to make sure the relevant people in the JCVI list are given the vaccine in the priority order that was shown.
This is a good point for me to stress that we will be inviting members of the public to join us in an active monitoring programme, and many will get a letter, it'll be by random allocation, inviting them to join this. So please help us to continue to build that body of knowledge about this important vaccine.
Could I just ask the point about whether the highest risk tiers are the ones which will get it first?
Professor Lim?
That is the intention of the prioritization order, is that the most vulnerable people are offered the vaccination first.
Thank you.
Tier 3?
Sorry.
In Tier 3?
You mean regional tiers?
Hmm.
Our prioritization order is not dependent on which tier somebody is in. It is a national prioritization order.
Thank you. That's very clear. Let's turn to the next question. Andy Woodcock from The Independent. Good morning.
Good morning. A couple of things. We appear to be getting authorisation for this vaccine ahead of our friends in Europe. I was just wondering, does the fact that the UK is no longer part of the EU, did that make any difference to the speed with which you were able to complete your authorisation? And secondly, as I understand it, the vaccine which you've authorised, we haven't ordered sufficient quantities to cover the whole of the population. I was wondering, do we have enough of this vaccine to get through all of the priority groups which you listed earlier on, or would we be dependent on waiting for further vaccines to be authorised in order to get to the position where the whole country can be safe from this disease?
We have been able to authorise the supply of this vaccine using provisions under European law which exist until the 1st of January. So our speed or our progress has been totally dependent on the availability of data in our rolling review and the rigorous assessment and independent advice we have received. So I hope that clarifies the point about the European relationship. Let's turn to Professor Lim around availability. Is there anything you'd like to add on this?
Yes, so it's a very good question about vaccine supply and availability. The whole reason why a priority listing is required is because we expect during a pandemic that vaccine supply will be limited in the first instance. And so vaccines should be offered in the first instance to the most vulnerable moving down the priority list. We will need as many vaccines as we can get, not just in the UK, but globally. And this includes more than one vaccine type in order to reach all the people who are at risk from COVID-19. So this is the start of a program and not the end of a program.
And we are absolutely in liaison with colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care in terms of all the evidence that we have to enable them to do their job to make sure availability is assured. Let's now turn to the next question from Chris Musson of Scottish Sun. Good morning.
Morning, everybody. Can I just check, what would your message be, your simple message to people who are sceptical about vaccine safety, particularly in light of some of the anti-vax misinformation that we're seeing spreading on social media? And can I check also, you're obviously going through a similar process with other prospective vaccines. Can you just summarise which ones and what are the timescales, the expected timescales for approval on those other vaccines? Thank you.
The public can be absolutely confident that every rigorous check has been done to reach the judgment that we reached, that the benefits far outweigh any risk, that the safety of the vaccine has been scrutinised independently by our Commission on Human Medicines and no stone has been left unturned. So absolute confidence in the safety, effectiveness and quality of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. In terms of further products, vaccines for COVID-19 that are coming through, there are two, you'll be aware, for which we have further rolling reviews ongoing, and those will be conducted to the absolute scientific standards that the public would expect. So, Munir, do you have anything to add on this?
No, thanks.
Let's turn.
Have you any indication on the timescales there for the other vaccine approvals?
It wouldn't be possible to predict today, simply that this rigorous process has started in the way that I've described, with every package or parcel of data as it's available being scrutinised. And my guess is, Sir Munir, your expert group is going to be working probably over Christmas to make sure that we complete our work in the shortest possible time. Thank you. Let's turn to Tom Colson from Business Insider.
Good morning. The Health Secretary has said that rolling out a vaccine will be challenging because it needs to be stored at very low temperatures. Do you foresee, Professor Lim, potential challenges in offering the Pfizer vaccine to vulnerable groups who might not be able to travel to a vaccination centre or whose GP surgery might not have the cold storage facilities necessary to store the vaccine?
Yes, indeed. I think every vaccine that comes through will probably have its own characteristics in terms of storage, transport, and deliverability. So the Pfizer vaccine in particular has a strong requirement for very cold storage, and there are stability issues potentially that constrain how a vaccine can be supplied to different people. Let's not forget that a mass vaccination program, as will be conducted very soon, is an unprecedented thing. It will be the largest vaccination program in the UK for decades. So there will be all manner of operational flexibilities that will be required during the deployment of the vaccine.
It has certainly been a very close scrutiny conducted by the expert working group in terms of the question you have asked, Tom. So, Munir, would you like to highlight the aspects you have been poring over?
Sure. As part of the assessment of the vaccine, we look at the quality, which includes the stability. And it does need to be stored at low temperature, at minus 70 degrees at least. But we know that once it's taken out, it can be stable between 2 to 8 degrees centigrade to allow for deployment in the vaccination sites. And that information is being shared with the relevant agencies, as NHS, public health bodies, so that they can actually sort out the deployment model and make sure that the stability of the vaccine is maintained.
It's critically important. Thank you for raising this key issue. Our next question comes from Jasmine Ralston from the Health Service Journal. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. A few from me. The vaccine has been approved by the MHRA with conditions. What are they? How should Trust decide which frontline staff have priority for vaccination? And how will you reassure NHS staff who are concerned that the vaccine may not be safe? And finally, will NHS staff be allowed to opt out of having the vaccination without penalty?
Thank you. The first question relates to the conditions, which, as you can imagine, are very strict and rigorous, mainly around the quality areas that we've just been exploring that need to be to the very highest standards. The second area will be around the vigilance, the monitoring of all the safety aspects, particularly, as Professor Lim has said, because so many people will want to have this vaccine. And the third area, we will have close control over the information that is provided to healthcare professionals and to the public, so that in having that very clear and very precise information, everyone can be confident the vaccine is going to reach them in the best possible way. So those are three main areas, but obviously the extent of the controls of the MHRA are very broad, in line with international guidance around good laboratory practice, good clinical practice, and good manufacturing practice. We will be watching very closely that all those requirements and conditions are complied with. Public can be confident of that. Perhaps I can turn to Professor Lim for some of the aspects you've raised, and particularly as NHS staff will need to have that confidence too.
Thank you. The JCVI has advised that there are certain frontline healthcare and social care workers who should be offered higher priority. And these are based around their own personal risk of coming to harm or having severe illness from COVID-19. Secondly, the amount of exposure that they have to people who have COVID-19 infection themselves. And thirdly, the amount of interaction they have with different people who are vulnerable and might acquire COVID-19. So we have set out some principles on how to prioritize different healthcare workers and use those when deployment of the vaccine is indicated. In terms of whether it should be voluntary or compulsory, at the moment there is no suggestion that the offer of vaccination should be compulsorily taken up. It is always an offer of vaccination, and whether somebody wants to have a vaccine or not, whether they're in the NHS or not, is at the moment a voluntary thing. But JCVI is not a policy-making body. Policy is made by ministers.
The clear and helpful information that will be provided will enable the conversations to go on an individual level, so that anyone who has any questions can have them clearly and thoroughly answered. So Munir, yes, please do.
Maybe I can add something about safety. The trials had about 40,000 individuals, and half of those received the vaccine and half received the placebo. From the data that's been provided, most of the adverse effects were mild and short-lasting, usually lasting for a day or two, similar to the kind of effects you get after any other vaccine. So that is really important to note. We haven't identified any serious adverse reactions throughout the trial program, but it is important to continually monitor the safety of this, and the MHRA has a very proactive vigilance strategy to be able to monitor the safety. Prominent amongst that is a yellow card system, which anybody can report on, including members of the public, but also the active recall system that the MHRA is going to launch, which will ask members to be able to join and look at what's happening with the vaccine and whether they're developing any kind of side effects.
It's all well prepared and we're ready to roll into action now. I think that completes all our questions. Thank you to all the journalists who've joined this morning. I'll ask my colleagues if you have any final remarks. Professor Lim?
Yes, I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in helping JCVI come to its advice. I'd like to stress that we have so far advised how the vaccine might be used in the first phase of the program. We haven't yet decided how the vaccine might be used in subsequent phases of the program, and we will be monitoring all the new emerging data, including data coming out from phase 1 of the program, in order to make our further decisions.
Thank you, that's really helpful. So Munir, any concluding remarks?
Thank you. I think that we are in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic, and think this is a historic moment. The UK is now one step closer to providing a safe and effective vaccine to help in the fight against COVID-19, a virus that has affected each and every one of us in some way, and this will help to save lives. Thank you.
I would simply like to conclude by reiterating that this vaccine, produced and developed by Pfizer-BioNTech, meets rigorous high standards of safety, of effectiveness, and of quality. The public's safety has always been at the forefront of our minds. Safety is our watchword, and it will always continue to be so. Thank you. We can now conclude this briefing.